This morning, unhappily, more than 30 people has been killed in a refugees camp in an attack. This is really a dilemma. How the international community can make implementable, can force the implementation of the decision of international criminal justice, or not the International Court of Justice. We have to respect the work of the International Criminal Court. We have to respect the work of this institution and let the court, without intimidation, to decide what they think about this initiative of the prosecutor. Unhappily, it's not the case.
Let's discuss this now with Chris Doyle in London. He's the director of the Council of Arab-British Understanding. Chris, it's good to have you on this news hour. What do you make of that call from Josep Borell? Because time and time again, we've seen Israel not adhere to international rules, not adhere to UN regulations, and of course now this latest ruling from the International Court of Justice. Do these calls from leaders like Josep Borell simply fall on deaf ears in Israel?
They do fall on deaf ears. Josep Borell actually has been one of the leaders in the West, at least in Europe, who has at least tried to stand up for international law. The problem doesn't really land at his door. It is more of an issue about President Biden in the United States, about Germany, about my own country, Britain, who have consistently failed to insist that Israel does abide by international law and that there should be consequences for when it does not. So to remind you, of course, for Friday, we had that ruling for provisional measures, additional provisional measures from the International Court of Justice. And it was only a week ago that the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders and Benjamin Netanyahu in your image there, and the Israeli defense minister. Now, international law should mean something, and it requires leaders of major states to insist that these courts, as Josep Borell said, carry out their business, their lawful duties, without any fear of sanction or intimidation. That hasn't happened. We've had 12 American Republican senators threatening sanctions. We've had other American leaders, politicians, saying that they will take action against the ICC, including even the family of the chief prosecutor, Karim Khan. So this is a very bleak moment because the rest of the world is watching and they are asking, really, why is Israel getting away with this? Why is it being allowed to get away with it? We are seeing this going time and time again. Yeah, if you go back to March, we had President Biden saying Rafah was a red line. Where is that red line?
That red line, it appears, has been crossed, especially when we see what's happened just overnight at that refugee camp. People being burned alive, some of the reports coming from there. While Josep Borell has made these calls, we also heard earlier today from the foreign ministers of Ireland, Spain and Norway talking about their country's recognition for a Palestinian state, which will be formally adopted on Tuesday. But is that recognition possibly too little, too late at this moment when we see what's happening in Gaza?
Nearly everything has been too little, too late. I mean, we've had 35,000 people minimum killed in Gaza. The destruction is so appalling that anything that the international community does now would be too little, too late. The recognition of the state of Palestine should have been carried out years ago. They clearly qualified. It was a failure to acknowledge the national rights of Palestinians. So, yes, finally, we have some of these additional Western European states making that step. But where is France, Germany, Britain, the major players within Europe? They're not doing anything on this front. So I'm afraid, with all great respect to Spain and Ireland and Norway, we need all the major powers in Europe to be doing this. And we need to have sanctions. We need to have punitive measures. Israel needs to know that there is a cost to the atrocities that it's perpetrating in Gaza and also in the West Bank. At the moment, it's free.
Is that the way forward here in terms of forcing Israel's hand? Sanctions seem to be the only way, especially when it comes to things like economic sanctions. Israel often referred to as an apartheid state, that coming from the situation in South Africa. Apartheid there only ended because of economic isolation, forcing the hand of the government.
Well, tragically, I fear that this is the case. Israel hasn't listened to the courts. It hasn't listened to those leaders, the UN agencies and others who have said, you've got to stop this. You are violating international law. It has not engaged in negotiations in good faith. I don't think that there ever really has been any prospect of a proper ceasefire in Gaza. And so I think that definitely a whole series of different forms of sanctions should be considered, but also there needs to be an exit route. We need to also to say, if you don't want to have all of these sanctions, this is what you've got to do. I mean, there needs to be a political horizon to get both peoples out of this absolute nightmare at the moment, so that we can actually help those hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are being starved to death and get aid in and end the carnage.
Chris, do you think a two-state solution is still viable at this stage, given that Israel has said this is not what we want?
You cannot write it off, but it looks so unlikely. The Israeli leadership, with the backing of its Israeli Jewish electorate, certainly does not back a two-state solution. And you do not see the political will from the international community, the leading actors, particularly the United States, to ensure that this comes around. And we've seen record number of settlement units in the West Bank being pushed forward this year. We had the largest land grab in March since the Oslo Accords of 1993. Israel is sending out a message that it's going to continue to expand those settlements, take more Palestinian land, and even, of course, you have Israeli ministers planning to recolonize the Gaza Strip when the military part of this conflict ends. So there is no sign that Israel wants to do this. But you can't rule it out if the international community comes together, presents a very determined, united viewpoint. Then you have to believe that there could be some form of solution, but it's so far away at the moment. And I think the focus should be right now, how do we get the end of this fighting, the aid in, and help all those people who've had their lives utterly destroyed?
Chris Boyle, appreciate your analysis, as always, speaking to us there from London.